Hello, my name is Katy Lewis and I am the head of MFL at Pearson Edexcel. I'm really pleased to be able to speak to you about some improvements that we've made to our French, German and Spanish GCSE qualifications. We have been listening ever since these qualifications came into first teaching in 2016 to your feedback about those parts of the qualification that you felt have been working really well for you and your learners, and those aspects of the qualification that have perhaps not been working as well as we might have hoped. When we have heard that feedback from you, we have then gone into all of the data that we can get from our examination series, all of that information about every single question and how every single candidate has performed, and really analyse that with an open mind and in a great deal of depth. What we've then done is to sort of pull that together into a great wealth of understanding about those aspects of the qualification which are perhaps less accessible and more challenging for candidates than we had intended them to be. Now, armed with all of that information and with your feedback, we actually, about 9 or 10 months ago now, after the 2019 assessments, came up with a trial whereby we created an alternative set of assessments that we then took out to 6 schools across the UK, 400 learners in total, all different kinds of students across French, German and Spanish, across foundation tier and higher tier, and we tested and trialled that alternative assessment model with those students. We also had a control group of students who sat the sample assessment materials in their current iteration. As well as actually having the students sit those exams, and we could obviously then mark them, see which ones they performed better at, see which ones they found more straightforward. We also actually interviewed and spoke to all of the students who had been part of that trial and their teachers to kind of find out what that experience of the assessment had been like. Because we all know, obviously, that it's not just about doing the test and getting the grade at the end of it. It's about having that experience in the exam hall where you really genuinely feel like there wasn't anything trying to trip you up. The only thing that we want our exams to do is to give students the opportunity to show us what they can do. And if there's anything about them structurally or in the way that they're presented which is preventing that from happening, then we don't want that to be there. We want to be able to take that away. So with the outcomes of all of that trialling, your feedback and the data that we were gathering from our 2018 and 2019 qualifications, we're now able to announce to you some of the improvements and amendments we'll be making to our qualification assessments from 2021 onwards. Now, the first thing I want to do is to reassure you that we're not changing any of the qualification content. So anything that you've already covered, all of the content and the topics that you've already covered, the themes you've already covered, those are still there, those are still valid and relevant, nothing to worry about from that perspective. What we are changing is some of the ways in which that is assessed then in all of the question papers, so paper 1, 2, 3 and 4. There are lots of places that you can go to find out what the detail of those changes would be. We've obviously updated the sample assessment materials, partly so that you can just see what some of these improvements are, and partly so that you can then test those materials with your students, give them an example and a model of what that 2021 assessment is going to look like. So for example, we've reduced the number of non-minimum core vocabulary words that we use in the extracts for listening and reading. We have reduced the inference profile in listening and reading, so there are fewer inference questions, and those inference questions are pitched to a slightly more accessible level. That's particularly true at the foundation tier. We've cut back on some of the length of the context and the rubrics in the writing papers, whilst also maintaining the bullet points, which we found in our trialling gave students a really helpful kind of scaffolding to hang their answer upon, and made it really clear for them, for example, what time frames they should be using. And then for paper 2, for the speaking, although we didn't include this in our trial, we understood from your feedback, and we've seen it ourselves in the examples that we receive, when students are required to ask a question, there's no prompt for that, obviously, in the teacher examiner card. So sometimes there's a kind of uncomfortable silence when the student forgets to ask the question, and you as the teacher examiner don't have a prompt to remind them. So we are adding in, from 2021 onwards, a prompt for you to say, do you have a question? And then the student can just carry on and ask their question, and they're not going to be penalised, of course, for having to have had that prompt. So those are just a few of the very high level summary of the amends that we've made. You can obviously review the sample assessment materials, the guidance that we have created, the documentation that we have produced to give you the details of what these amends are. But hopefully you will be pleased and excited, as I am, about these amends, and that you will agree that this is going to be a really positive benefit for your students.